last and final prophet of Allah. He was a mercy unto the universe. Peace and blessings be on Al-Mustafa. So he began this perfect.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace and the mercy of Allah be upon you. Welcome to Hadith Principles. We're learning about the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, what it is, its importance in Islam, and also the great efforts used by the scholars of Islam to preserve it, authenticate it, and protect it from any interpolation or distortions, additions or subtractions, so that they could convey the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, to us, so that we can trust its accuracy. Because the Hadiths are very important for us to learn. They are a very important source for understanding our religion, both its beliefs and its practices. And so we've been discussing different principles used by the scholars of Hadith to analyze both the isnad, or chain of narrators, as well as the matan, or the actual wording of the Hadith itself, to protect both of those things from any additions, subtractions, or changes or distortions. The scholars also looked for really very subtle, hidden defects in Hadiths. So if we looked at Hadiths, we saw the chain of narrators from the writer of a particular book, his teachers, their teachers, back in a continuous chain to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we looked in the books narrating, telling us about those narrators, those scholars, or those people who learned the Hadiths. Who were they? Did they know each other? Did they study with each other? Meet each other, so that you can be sure that that chain is continuous, going back to the Prophet, and there is no inqita, or severing of that chain, or cut in the chain in any way. So it goes back, it's marfu', or it's muttasal al-isnad, a complete isnad, back to the top. Then you'll be very sure that it is an authentic hadith of the Prophet, and you're going to say it's sahih. But we had some real high specialists in hadith. And they didn't just memorize the hadith. They didn't just examine the narrators and know about those narrators. But they would take every possible version of the hadiths. So different hadith would come to us in different sources. So the Prophet would, as I said before, it's like the family tree. The Prophet would tell a hadith to his companions. Then different companions, they went to different parts of the world. Some of them went to Africa. Some of them went to Yemen, to the south. Some of them went to the north, to Syria, or even to Europe, to what is now Turkey, for example, or to Central Asia. And so they all had different students in different parts of the world. And then their students passed down those hadith. So they would gather the same hadiths of the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, from different sources going back to authenticate those hadith. And they would look at and examine who taught whom very carefully to make sure that the hadiths were very authentic. And sometimes they found some of these chains of narrators contained confusions and what you would call muddled, confused narrations. That is, in the text itself, or very frequently in the isnad. And so Ibn Kathir tells us, if the narrators of the hadith disagree about a particular sheikh or some other points in the isnad, so different narrators each narrate it and say it's from a different sheikh and then from the same sahabi, and they disagree about where this hadith came from. And you can't tell which one is the right one, which one is wrong. So you can't tell whether who is better than whom. So maybe there's an addition in the text, like we said, or a change in isnad, like we said about the hadith of Asma and Aisha, but we can't tell who is right and who is wrong, then that is called mudtarab. It is a muddled chain or muddled hadith. And so it's hard in that case to accept such a hadith. And so, for example, Abu Bakr is reported to have said, "O Messenger of Allah, I see you getting older." And the Prophet replied, "What made me old are Surat Hud and its sister surahs." And Ad-Darqutni, one of the scholars of hadith, said, this is an example of mudtarab hadith, ittarab in the hadith. It is reported through Abu Ishaq, and there are at least 10 different opinions about its isnad. Some say it's a mursal hadith. Some say it is muttasil. So some say it's going all the way, complete. Some say, no, there's a break. Some say it's musnad of Abu Bakr, so it's complete up until Abu Bakr, while others say it's up until Sa'd or Aisha. And all these reports are similar in weight. You can't tell which one is more authentic, and so they just consider it mudtarab hadith, and so they don't accept it by that reason. There's a good example of a well-known hadith, and this is used by the scholars of fiqh, of Rafi'. Rafi' ibn Khadij narrated that the Prophet of Allah, peace and blessing be upon him, this is hadith about sharecropping or renting of land, that he forbade renting out of agricultural land. And so the reporters give many different statements about this hadith. So one of them asked Rafi', what about renting for gold and silver? And he replied, it doesn't matter if it's rent for gold or silver. So he forbids both sharecropping, where you rent and you share the produce with the owner. So you share a percentage of what you grow with the owner, and he forbid renting it out for money, gold or silver or dollars or pounds. And in another version, the Prophet, Rafi' said, whoever owns a piece of land should cultivate it. You should grow food on it, otherwise give it to your brother to cultivate it or abandon it. And in another version, the Prophet narrated forbade renting of farmland. And in another version, the son of Rafi' narrated from Rafi' that the Prophet forbade the renting of land. A different narration by Rafi' from the Prophet ﷺ, Prophet says, whoever owns a piece of land should either cultivate it or give it to his brother to cultivate. He must not rent it out for a third or a quarter of the produce or any given quantity. That means sharecropping. So it seems to be forbidding sharecropping of land. Zayd ibn Thabit, one of the Sahaba, said, may Allah forgive Rafi'. I am more aware of the hadith than he. And that is true. He is a much more scholarly in the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad than Rafi'. What happened was that two of the Ansar had an argument or dispute, and so they came to the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, and after hearing their case, he said, if this is your position, then do not rent out the farms. Rafi' only heard the last part, do not rent out the farms. So they were disputing over the particular piece of land, and so the Prophet said, well, if you guys are going to argue over it, then don't rent it out. Some of them wanted to rent it out, some of them didn't want to. So if all the people who have a right don't agree, then you can't do anything. And so he said Rafi' only heard the last part. So Rafi' heard from the Prophet, but he didn't know the whole situation. And that is the context of the hadith. Just like the Quran has asbab and nuzul, it has context. If you read an ayah and you don't know the particular situation that happened, you might not understand the ayah correctly, and you might apply it in an incorrect way if you don't know in some particular ayahs. Likewise, in the hadith, if you don't know the particular situation of the hadith, you might misunderstand it and be mistaken in its meaning. And this is especially true because Ahmad ibn Hanbal narrates the hadith or Ahmad ibn Hanbal says about this hadith that he does not accept this hadith because Ibn Umar narrated that Allah's Messenger, peace and blessing be upon him, gave the land of Khaybar to the Jewish population there on a condition that they work that land and they give to the Muslim half of the produce of that land. So they had made a treaty with the Prophet ﷺ to leave and go to another place. Then they broke their treaty. So the Prophet told them, then you stay here and you work the land and you give a share to the Muslims. And so by the opinion of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, that's his fiqh or his opinion, then it is permissible to, if I own land, to let somebody farm that land and share with me part of what he produces, or to share or to pay me rent for that land. There's also another situation which is called al-maqlub, which is a reversal in the wording of the hadith. And so there's a famous hadith about Allah on the Day of Judgment. Muslim reports on the Day of Judgment, there are 7 who will be sheltered by Allah on the Day of Judgment. A man who conceals his act of charity to the extent that his right hand does not know what his left hand gives in charity. But if you read in Imam Bukhari and Muslim, both say his left hand does not know what his right hand gives. And of course that is the correct one. You give the charity with your right hand to your Muslim brother, not with your left hand. But it was a mistake or maqlub in this hadith that the left was substituted from the right. And so there's a famous example where they used to test Imam Bukhari. And so the scholars of Baghdad tested him, and they did these little changes in the hadith, and Imam Bukhari got them all right. That is why he is so great in hadith. We're going to go to a break. We'll be back shortly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Muhammad is the last and final prophet of Allah.
Ask Hoda.
Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to a new edition of Ask Huda.
I have 2 questions.
Please go ahead. You can read it in Arabic, and you can also understand the meaning in your own language. The different tafsir and the interpretation of the meanings of the Quran are available in almost every language that exists on earth by the grace of Allah. The water of Zamzam is for whatever intention you drink it with. Salih from Egypt, his father has the way, and he asked about how can he help him. Very good question.
Can they give a zakat to any of the dawah centers?
The ibadah or the act of worship is a part of the unity of worship. It has to be paid to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in accordance with the guidance of His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Dear viewers, Hoda programs can be watched in the English section of the in-flight entertainment directory on board all Saudi airline flights, domestic and international. Sit back, relax and enjoy watching Hoda's entertaining and enlightening shows on your trip. Hoda wishes you a safe and successful journey. Hoda, a light in every home.
Muhammad is the last and final prophet of Allah.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Hadith Principles. We're talking about some of the principles used to analyze hadith and to determine their authenticity or to reject hadith which are not authentic and cannot be used as a source for Islamic teaching. The first example we gave is the mudtarab hadith. And so the mudtarab hadith, it has actually idtirab, inshallah. That means it's muddled or confused. What does that mean? Can anybody tell me what it means? What is the mudtarab hadith?
Is, for example, it is narrated by more than one narration, and in each narration there is a difference between the another.
Yes. So we already talked before about hadiths that were where one narrator, for example, narrated in contradiction to other narrators, right? Or added something which was in contradiction to other narrators. Muttarab hadith, these things happen. There is some addition in this hadith, but we cannot tell because there are so many different people who say different statements about these people in the hadith, whether they are authentic or not, whether it goes to the Prophet. Maybe in one version it goes to the Prophet, in another version it goes to a Sahabi, in another version there's a cut between them, and so you can't tell which narrator is better than the others. So they're all equal. We can't tell who can be trusted in that case. And so this case, we can't use that hadith as a source. So if there's not some way of identifying a more authentic version of this hadith, then we have to look out. We have to be careful of that hadith. So even though we don't know, there may be one of those people was actually right. We can't show who's right and who's wrong. And in those cases, we can't accept those hadith. And so there's so many different opinions. The other example we gave, the hadith of Rafi', in which Rafi' gave many, many different versions. And his version was, of course, contradictory to the hadith of Umar ibn Khattab. But you might say it's like ziyada at-thiqa. It's an addition of a trustworthy source. But in fact, it's not. It's contradicting Omar and his version of the hadith, and each of his versions were contradicting each other. And so there are so many narrations that the scholars did not accept those hadiths from them. And also, sometimes they just get things wrong, but you'll see in another version, the right version, like the left hand instead of the right hand. Or they change in the isnad, one narrator, they change his name with the other narrator. All the narrators are there, but they get them in the wrong order. Or they change the name. So instead of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, they get the father's name mixed up with the son's name. And those kind of confusion are called maqlub hadiths. Those are all found. Also, those are mistakes in the hadith. And those hadiths are known, maqlub hadiths are known by comparing them to other hadiths, other versions. And so we only follow the version which does not contain those errors. And so the scholars tell that by comparing many different versions of the hadith to find which one is the perfect one. So sometime you found in Sahih Muslim a hadith. It's authentic. But it says the left hand does not know what the right hand gives. While, of course, the correct version is the right hand, because you wouldn't give to your brother with the left hand in Islam. That's contradicting, of course, very famous, well-known hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, which are mutawatir. There are so many hadiths talking about that the Prophet used the right hand instead of the left hand in any good action that he did.
Okay. Yes, Sheikh, I have a question.
I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce the brothers, inshallah, Muhammad and Ayman and Muhammad. And I'm so sorry that we forget to mention them in the beginning of the program. And Hussam. And so Adil.
Yes, sir.
Muhammad Adil.
Yes, from Egypt.
Or you prefer to be called Muhammad from Egypt. And Ayman from the United States. And Hussam from Egypt. I'm so sorry. But welcome, brothers. It's nice to have you here. Inshallah.
Yeah.
You really are a big help to me, inshallah.
So I have a question, Sheikh. Some hadith terminology is very confusing for me. For example, we sometimes say hadith munqati' and sometimes say hadith maqtu'. Are they the same?
There's very technical differences in each one of those things. The inqita' could be in any level of this hadith. Inqita' is any severance in the hadith. So the hadith, the opposite of it is it's not muttasil. It's not continuous. And so even if the hadith was, for example, to be muttasil, it has to go to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. While if it is musnad, the musnad hadith, it could be going to a sahabi. And it's musnad up to that sahabi. And so then if you want to understand the term, look at its opposite, inshallah. And then you can discover, by looking at its opposite, you can discover what it is, inshallah.
Yes, I have a question, please. Yes. What if two authentic narrations contradict each other?
Well, once again, first of all, when you look, it appears that they're both authentic. And we assume they are authentic. If you look at the text, sometimes they are not really contradictory. So for example, it could be an example of nasikh and mansukh, which is abrogation in Islam. That at one stage the Prophet didn't have a certain commandment, and that came later on in the Quran or in the Hadith. And so at the earlier stage, the Prophet allowed, for example, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ went to his uncle Hamza, the martyr and shaheed of Islam at the Battle of Uhud. He went to Hamza, to his house, and found him drinking, and there was drinking and dancing with other people, and said some bad words because he was drunk. That is, of course, before the Quran came down, canceling out, saying that khamr and maisir are from shaitan, and we have to stay far away from khamr and maisir, from drinking alcohol or intoxicants and gambling. And the Prophet explained to us that any intoxicant is khamr, and so it is forbidden. So that's an example, and so that may exist in the Hadith. So you have to have that knowledge of what happened first and what happened later. And sometimes you can resolve the meaning. It appears to be contradictory, but after looking carefully, you can see that it's only, as I said, for example, one is adding some specific information that is not found in the other one. Or the Prophet said, for example, people would come to the Prophet ﷺ and said, what thing is best in Islam? What are the best actions? For each Sahabi, when he was asked, what's the best part of Islam? Or what is the best thing for me to do as a Muslim? He would give them sometimes different answers, like salat, or fasting, or jihad, or many different other areas. And so he gave to each one advice. It wasn't contradictory. It was just he gave specific advice based on that particular person. So we have to look and see maybe they aren't actually contradictory at all. And then if there are apparent contradictions, then we look to see which is the most authentic source. So if a hadith in Bukhari contradicts a hadith in Abu Dawud, we're going to accept the hadith in Bukhari because that is considered the most authentic source. And then, of course, we can look at the actual isnads, and of course, the ulama of hadith look at the actual isnads, and they accept some and reject some, inshallah.
As for the collections of hadith, some books are called Jami', other books are called Musnad, and some other books are called some other terminology. So what's the difference between these?
Oh, mashallah.
Sunan
Actually, the titles of those books, some of them are the actual title, and some of them are just the popular names of them. So if you see, like, for example, the Sahih al-Bukhari, it's al-Jami' al-Sahih. It's a very long name. From Aqwal and Nabi and Af'alihi, it's a very long title. And it's not always the same title in every edition of the book. But it's called Jami'. And also the Sahih Muslim is called Jami'. And Jami' in Arabic means comprehensive. And so the books that are Jami', usually what that title means is that it contains a lot of lessons from the life of the Prophet. Everything you need to know really as a Muslim, different chapters. The beginning of the revelation and matters of belief in Islam. So if you look at Bukhari, important matters of aqeedah are there, of our Islamic doctrine and belief. And seerah, and hadith about the Sahaba, which, about the Ansar and the Muhajirin, the people of Mecca and the people of Medina. The migrants from Mecca are called the Muhajirin, and the people of Medina who helped them are called the Ansar. And so many, many different kinds of chapters in law and belief, jurisprudence. The books that are called Musnad contain hadiths by the Sahaba who narrated them. So the Musnad of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, for example, it contains, first of all, chapter of Abu Bakr, then the chapter of Omar, then later on chapter of Abu Hurairah, chapter of Aisha. But they're not by subject. The books called Sunan are normally about the Islamic laws, starting with wudu, purification, tahara, salat, and the time of salat, going on zakat, hajj, and mu'amalat, the interactions between Muslims. And so there are many different kinds of titles of those books. They're all valuable, and there's good information in all of them, and we should learn more about them and their authors and their contents, inshallah. May Allah Almighty guide all of us to the understanding of our faith. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Muhammad is the last and final prophet of Allah. He was a mercy unto the universe. Peace and blessings be on Al-Mustafa. So he began this perfect man, sending his word across the land, leading only by his sunnah and the Quran, the word of Allah. He brought the answer to this cruel world, our beloved Prophet Muhammad.